Score North and ScoreNorth.com. Local Daily, presented by Surly Brewing Company.
I think I'm pretty sure this is Reusse's, the legendary Patrick Reusse, Star Tribune columnist. I think this might be your Purple Daily debut since we switched to the YouTube format.
I believe it is. Yes, I can't remember being on Purple Daily. I don't have any great insight since I get out to Egan about twice a year. So that's that's about it. So I don't blame you for going elsewhere for your Viking insight.
Well, I mean, you are a YouTube star on your own over on your Unchained now, but we figured. So I was born a year after. Actually, I was born maybe the last year of was 85 the last year Bud Grant coached.
He came back. He left in 83, and then Les Steckel got him a very good contract to come back in 85, and he only went 1 year. Do you want to go through that whole thing? 83, the Gophers are looking for a new football coach, and they bring in Lou Holtz. And then Bud kind of out of nowhere resigns. To tell Sid was flying out to Hawaii to tell Max Winter along with Mike Lynn that Sid was quitting. Sid got off in the plane in L.A. and so he could have the scoop back here that Bud was retiring, but it came out of nowhere in 83. And then the Gophers hired Lou Holtz, or they had hired Lou Holtz, and Lou comes in, Phil, and creates this phenomenon. It's unbelievable the way people respond to this guy. We love BSers, man. And he's, as good a BSer as Fleck is, this guy's better. He's more sophisticated. And, he was unbelievable. And then Les Steckel goes 3-13. And Lynn was in a complete panic because the Gophers were going to take over the town. They only went 4-7 Holtz's first year, but they had 58,000 in there a few times. And we had Lou Holtz lookalike contests, and everybody was all in on Lou. So he called up Bud and wanted to bring Bud back. And Bud, genius that he was, we thought he was coming back for 2-3 years. Maybe he only came back for one. He got an ironclad contract that was lifetime for the Vikings. And he looked ahead of it. It included free gas. The new contract included free gas because they had that pump down there at Winter Park.
Like forever.
Well, for as long as they had the pump. I don't think they had to put us. I think they got rid of the pump because of Bud, because he was gassing up all the kids' cars and everybody else.
Bud had a Bobby Bonilla contract before Bobby Bonilla.
Bud lived like a mile from the Winter Park, right over there at Anderson Lakes. So you'd be out there. We used to watch practice then. You could go down and stand there and watch practice. It was not the Nazi regime that it is now. And where you could, you couldn't go here and there. You just went down and watched practice, and you'd see Bud pull up to the pump in his car, and then an hour later he'd pull up to the pump in another car, and one of the kids' cars. The whole kids,
some neighbors.
Yeah, the kids were all getting old enough to drive then, and they were getting their gas there too. So, but my favorite part of the contract was, he had in there, he would have an office with a window. And you remember this, Judd, when Hedrick tried to move him inside? Roger Hedrick, about they were going to redo the offices, and Roger was running it, and he was going to put Bud in an interior office. Bud went home, got the contract, and brought it back and said, "Office with window." It says right here. So, so he wanted to be able to look out and see if there was any deer walking across the field or something. So, I mean, he was always ahead of the game on stuff like that. He thought of everything to benefit himself, and he still had a nice office out at the new place as part of that contract. So I'm not sure how often he got out there to use it. I think O'Connell was saying that he'd be out there once a week for lunch or something. I'm not sure if he got out there that often, but anyway, it was they brought him back in 85, and he only coached 1 year. So And I think they were only 6-10 that year, right? Right, Judd? Something like that.
Yeah, they got up to a 2-0 start, and we all thought Bud's back and it's going to be great. And I think they won 6 or 7 games.
They had well, before he quit, those were years when they won a couple of division titles, but they were 8-7-1 and 9-7. I mean, the division stunk, and they were just they didn't stink quite as much as everybody else did. Was they after I know that Stewie Boy always told me that by 76, what was the fourth Super Bowl with Oakland, that they were declined. They were in decline then, and and then they won the Mud Bowl in 77, which, kind of put off the inevitable. But, by the late 70s, they were running on fumes, and then came the Page feud and all that other stuff. So, his last few years were fairly mediocre, but he certainly was going to be an improvement on Les Steckel, which was, as Wong wrote, one of the most tasteless lines ever as the beat guy. Les, was an officer in Vietnam, and he said, Les always tells us how many men he took into combat. We want to know how many he brought back, or something like that. It was something like that. I mean, it was, boy, the wheels went off that thing in a hurry. So anyway, that was it, though. But he coached. It seemed like he was here longer, but he coached 17 years and then came back for one. So he was here 18 seasons. So.
Yeah, he is, and just like everything about him, and again, I didn't get to live through his actual coaching career, but his stoicism. He was, if there was a picture of Minnesota personified, it would be Bud's stoicism. Bud 10 years ago walking out for the coin flip in a t-shirt when it's minus 30.
By the way, Bobby Hagan and his, I think his speech is over by now, isn't it, Judd? I think the end of the year, but just recently.
I missed it. Sorry. I left too early.
3 days ago, but it was long. But he said that was Bud said to him that they told him like on the previous Sunday, they wanted him to come out for the coin toss. And he said, okay, what I'll do is walk out there in my jacket, and then I'll take the jacket off in the cold. And Bob Hagan said, well, he said when Bud said this, it was like 50 degrees that day, 40 degrees. And Bob said, Bud, the forecast says it's going to be 25 below wind chill that day and Sunday. And the original plan was Bud was going to walk out there with a jacket and then take it off in the short sleeves. But the idea was Bud's, but then Bud said, the hell with it, and just walked out there in his shirt sleeves. And Bud said, Hagan told Bud, your body can withstand anything for 10 minutes. So that's what he figured he'd get out there back.
He was like 85 years old when he was definitely in his mid 80s, right? 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, what season was it?
2013 or 15.
13.
So he was pushing
8 years ago.
Old.
So
about 85.
85, 85 or 86. But he, one of the last times I talked to him the last year or so, actually at O'Connell's, it wasn't, I mean, I've talked to him since then, but at O'Connell's introduction, he was there. They brought him in, and then he said, I want to talk to you. So I sat down and talked to him for 40 minutes after it was over. And in that, man, he says, my mind is okay. I got hearing aids, but they are, man, and my vision's okay. But he said my skeleton is letting me down, was what he told me then. So, although they still got him out. I know Mike got him out in the deer stand. They had it all set up so the deer stand, it was easier to get, but they had him up in the Northwoods deer hunting this November.
So he was at the he was part of the speaking group at the anniversary that they did at the Mall of America for the Rashad Miracle Catch, Pat, and it was Ahmad, Tommy Kramer, and Bud, and this is December, and the remarkable thing was for his age, his memory was fantastic, and he was still incredibly articulate. Like, you would have never guessed that this man was in his 90s.
And
his skeleton, like you said.
I had some long conversations with him, and he's like all of us. I'm this way at 77, where there's that tick, where you're trying to remember what you were going to say or something like that. He had a few of those moments, but he remembers. He just pauses for a little bit. But yeah, he was. Incredible. I think we all joked about this yesterday. If you can joke, is we were surprised that Sid died at 100. It's the only time in history anybody's been surprised that somebody died at 100, and you're surprised that Bud died at 95. Mike showed up at the Hagen event because Bud wasn't feeling well, but Mike, his son, said, "I think he's not doing great, but I think he's fine. He'll get over this. He's had lower moments and he's fine." And so I was shocked, as you can be, about a 95-year-old dying when I heard it yesterday morning. But he wasn't able to show up for the Hagen event as he had planned to. So I guess I don't know. He just he's one of the most unique human beings I've ever met in my life. It's just, one of the stories Hagen told and tells you everything about him. He was having one of his garage sales, right? And Channel 9 sent out some 23-year-old kid who didn't even know who Bud Grant was to do a, story like a reporter. And he says, "So Coach Grant, how much money did you make on the garage sale last year?" Grant looks at him and says, 5 seconds, he says, "What, are you from the IRS?" and then he didn't say a word for 15 seconds. He didn't expand on that. Yeah. And then the guy finally decided he had to change the topic. There is no way that Bud is going to tell you how much he made, because damn well he didn't pay taxes on it. So, but we all talk about what a wonderful guy he was, and he, more than wonderful, he was unique. He was unique because he never paid retail for anything in his whole life, and he basically had a coach on his staff. He only had 5 or 6 coaches, and one of them, Buzz Mertes, was in charge of bargains. None of those guys ever paid retail for a refrigerator in their life. The whole coaching staff.
The garage sale thing. Could you imagine? So Bud Grant was one of the 3 or 5, figurehead coaches of the NFL for 20 years, right? Could you imagine, like, in 15, 20 years, Andy Reid or Bill Belichick just sitting outside on a lawn chair, the garage door open, Patriots memorabilia for sale strewn about the lawn?
Yeah, and then I think they were running out of his novelty, or maybe they had less material than that, but about 4 or 5 years ago, the 4 or 5 of the last ones, he started charging for autographs. They started charging, like, I think $25 for autographs, and some woman sent me an email, but this is a year ago maybe, about how she comes up and gives her this. He gives him this. "Oh, my mother, she's got cancer and she's near death, and she loves you. She just loves you. Could I get your autograph?" And Bud says, "Sure." And he says, "That'll be $25." Yeah. I believe it.
Someone got to all those guys. Carl Eller is doing the Purple People. Every picture of Carl Eller now is like Purple People Eaters swag. Get your Purple People Eaters swag at purplepeopleeaters.com.
We all think of modern times and how these guys retire with piles of money. I wonder what's the most Carl Eller ever made. Yeah,
100.
Did he ever make $1 billion? No.
Not even close, right?
Yeah, a couple 100,000 maybe, and
probably tops.
That doesn't last forever. But he was, Bud is. I actually, I was high school writer, baseball writer through 78. So all I would do for the Vikings, it was visiting locker rooms. And I wrote one column a week that was general interest. So I'd go out there once in a while, but I didn't really deal with him a whole lot. But the worship with which he was covered, it was like a daily contest between Sid and Klobuchar, who was then at the Star. He was at St. Paul briefly, then at the Star, to see who could fawn over Grant and Tarkington the most. I mean, and you know me, I'm a, believe it or not, occasionally contrary. So I love to, I started calling him Horseshoe Harry and having fun with him, and tried to put a little irreverence into the coverage of Bud. And he, even if he noticed it, he wouldn't have said anything.
Yeah.
He wouldn't give you the benefit of letting you know. You know, the one guy that drove him crazy though, like TK, Jeff Linehan drove him nuts. You know, he couldn't. TK would ignore everybody but Linehan. He hated him. And the Star Tribune had a guy named Charlie McKenna. Remember, that was before your time probably. But Charlie was like a war protester guy with long hair and irreverent and kind of like Thomas, and he'd ask anything, and so they'd do the post-game press conferences, and the questions were always, Bud, nobody really challenged him or anything, but Charlie got on his nerves. And it was hard to get on Bud's nerves. Even if you got on his nerves, he wasn't going to let you know it, because it was then you win, right? Then you win,
right? Because it's obvious.
But Charlie, for some reason, he hated Charlie McKenna. So that had to be mid 70s, maybe.
Probably.
I'm not sure. Yeah, late 70s, maybe.
So Pat, on Bud too, I think the thing that people for the most part don't know is his athletic abilities. What, three-sport athlete at the like that's the one thing that's
Lakers
probably
put
lost.
out a tribute to him yesterday.
Yes.
Think about
played
it.
for the Eagles,
Yeah,
played for the Lakers.
He was, now Sid was one of the executives, and Sid and Max Winter were the executives with the Lakers, and they basically had Mike and Pollard, Doogie Martin, Mickelson, right? And then they surrounded the rest of them with, they put gophers and local guys from Hamlin as the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th men, and Bud was one of those guys. Bud was a huge admirer of George Mikan, though, because he got to see how much he went through to, George Mikan tried to play in a playoff game with a broken leg and stuff like that. So he was a huge admirer of him. And I think he only played, a couple of years with the Lakers. He was on the 50 team. He was on the 50 championship team. I think he got that ring. In fact, Mike Grant was trying to find out if he was the oldest last year. If he was the oldest Laker from a championship team, if Bud was the oldest survivor. But this guy from Utah, a good Mormon from Utah, Arnie Farron's still alive. And I said, you can't outlive a Mormon, man. Those guys live to be 106. The guy gets elected to the leader of the church at 92, So Arnie, I don't know if Arnie's still alive, but I think Bud, I think he outlasted Bud.
He was a 4-time Canadian Football League Grey Cup champion coach before that was late 50s. Early. What made him such a great coach, Pat?
He always, one thing, before it was fashionable, he didn't practice the hell out of him. He did not practice
load management. He was the godfather of load management.
Mm-hmm. Now you could do something to irritate him, and then you would, I don't know if you get cut, but you would get, kind of phased out. You could, I think you had to really be a jerk to irritate him if you were a good player. If you were a good player, he had high tolerance. I mean, the whole durability. You know who sent out a tribute to him yesterday? Cat.
Yeah.
I got news for you, Cat. Bud Grant would have hated you. The fact that you missed 3 months with a sore calf, Bud would have cut you to a months ago. Okay, Cat, you are the anti-Bud, because to Bud it was plain. Durability is more important than it, but sometimes it was durability is as important as ability, but it was durability. Sometimes you would say is more important than ability. Look at those teams. Now you got to remember that they had like 40 player rosters, Phil, back then. 40, maybe, or low 40s.
43.
He would start. It was a big deal when there was a new starter, especially on D. I mean, it was so. Oh man, they got Matt Blair. They've drafted him. Maybe in 2 years he can be a linebacker for this team. It was the same guys played all the time, and the other thing is, you can look at their defense. You can look at Paul Krause, right? He loved Paul Krause, even though I always tell Paul Krause he had more interceptions than tackles. Bud just didn't want him to let anybody get behind him. He didn't care if he ever came up and hit anybody in his life, a safety. But you look at the cornerbacks they had: Jeff Wright, Bobby Bryant, Nate Wright. Not great athletes, but they didn't let guys get behind them for big plays too often. And he was like, not a Tampa 2 or anything like that, because they always had the pass rush and stuff. But defensively, don't make mistakes. Don't make mistakes. Don't make big screw ups. And if you could do that, he was a lot like Belichick. You can play for me 3 years past your prime. If you don't make mistakes. That was one thing. I think he had a great eye for the talent he wanted. What I mean was he had a great eye for those guys. And I'm wondering, they all say they knew where they stood with them, but when somebody was done, he would call them in and tell them they were done. He'd always give you a couple extra years, but when Bud calls you in, and very few of them. I mean, Carl Eller went out and played in Seattle for a year, but very few of them played after Bud told them they were done. That pretty much was it for most of them. I don't know. The one great feud he had was Alan Page. That got ugly. They two strong, hard-headed guys, and Bud got mad at him because he became a runner and got down to 225 pounds, and Bud didn't think he could play anymore and cut him. And I saw that Thomason got a hold of Alan. I almost called Alan yesterday and didn't bother, but a very lukewarm tribute by Alan.
Wow! So even to this day,
I don't know. I've told this story, Phil, that I happened to be at Winter Park when Page was not Winter Park, Mankato, when Page was retired and finishing up law school, and was working with Ed Garvey with the union, and the union was making their visit to Mankato, and they were coming down. Garvey, who I loved, who's a great guy, funnier now, but very ineffective as a union leader, but funnier now. And Page was walking with him, and Bud happened to be coming out of Gage Hall at the time. They were coming down about 4 p.m, and they looked at each other. I don't think they'd been in each other's company since the falling out. And Bud looked and said, "Oh, look who we got here," Bud said. And they shook hands, and it was a 90-degree day, and the temperature was about 15 degrees when those two guys shook hands. It never got patched up. So I don't think, to my knowledge.
Was that the only guy that he had a feud with? Because it seemed he and Tarkington were good, right?
Oh yeah, Tarkington throw 30 interceptions, and he would, be shake it off. Yeah, he and Tarkington were, they all liked him because he did not. I don't think he had great demands on personal behavior. He didn't have great demands on, just play, be ready to play. He had great demands on being ready to play. Would be what I would say about him, but if you were having the Saturday walkthrough, for instance, at Winter Park, and I was scheduled for an hour and a half. And Bud looked up at the sky and saw ducks flying down towards the Minnesota River. He might just knock it off right then and go down and shoot some ducks. So he spent half his time looking up at the sky in the fall to see if anything was flying or not. One of the great stories this one doesn't get any pub, but I love it. It's my favorite story ever. He was up in Canada, and this was 70, early 70s probably. Finks was still here, whenever that was. And he went to Canada, and he was with some bush pilot shooting wolves out of airplane. They were chasing packs of wolves, and Bud was shooting wolves out of airplanes. And he got charged. He and another guy, and they got charged in Canada because it was illegal, doing it in some kind of Canada. And Finks always called him Mark Trail, which is the name of an old, cartoon about an outdoorsman, Mark Trail. Finks said somebody one day, a few weeks later, called and said, was looking for Bud. I don't know if it was Sid or who it was. And we was looking for Bud, and Finks says, I don't know where Mark Trail is. He's probably out dynamiting walleye. After the wolf thing, Bud apologized profusely and everything. But he was hunting and fishing and all that stuff was just as important to him as football, I think.
Yeah.
He's he and Bernsey, though. I mean, I wrote about this today, but talk about two opposites, man. One guy, as I said, one guy went north for his recreation. The other guy went to Jamaica. He couldn't wait to get out of here. So what, it's, it's funny. We do, the Star Tribune blew it out and everybody, it's this huge thing, but man, that's a long time ago for him to still be around and that prominent. That's 38 years ago since he last coached.
Yeah, and whether it was, I'm getting a weird echo here. Hopefully there we go, it goes away. I think whether it was the Vikings or a combination of Bud or just like the great reporting and stories from you and Sid, the younger generations, I feel like, and just kind of surveying social media yesterday, he just stayed top of mind for 3 extra generations of Vikings fans, and that's what's incredible. Well,
the Metrodome. Moving to the Metrodome in '82, I mean, they didn't ever really have a great team in the Metrodome when he was there. But that really changed the persona, because, I mean, it was steely-eyed, but, wearing a sweatshirt, basically, on the sidelines and gazing forward as everyone around him was blowing smoke out of, from the cold weather and stuff, the whole no heaters on the sideline thing. And we loved that, man, in the 70s. We're tougher because Bud was tougher than everybody. Minnesotans, we as a people were tougher than everybody. That was sort of the belief, and that carried over all these years later. And smart guy, smart guy is what a great way to get yourself back front of mind than walking out there in shirt sleeves when it's 25 below zero. That was, and he thought of it. It wasn't Bob Hagan telling him to do that or somebody like that. It was their idea to have him go out for the coin flip. But Bud was smart enough to know. And I've told Judd this. I probably told you this, Bill. He and I were, I knew him. I'd say hello to him. But the last 8-10 years, I've you call me, I'll call him. I got to be, I would say, friendly with him. And especially when Sid was deteriorating, and then he'd say, "Hey, come here, I got to talk to you at an event," if I saw him, and then he'd complain about kneeling down, or he wanted to get the new rule in that you had to make 1 yard or the clock stopped in the last 2 minutes, and he hated the new kickoffs. He hated the fact that you never could get kickoff. He talked to me about stuff like that. But the thing it is, for 35 years, Bud would say, Sid is a reporter, and you guys are just a bunch of writers. Sid is out there grinding. He's got 8 stories every day. You guys are just a bunch of writers. The last 6-7 years, he's been saying to me, you know what I like about you? You're a writer. The other guys are just a bunch of reporters. That shows what a genius he is. He can 180 it to keep you feeling good about him. Of course, he was never. As I said, I don't think he was hostile. His post game interviews were not. He never just blurted something out. He always thought about everything he was going to say. He hated the officials, though. Once in a while, you'd get him going on the officials. I remember one night in Buffalo. It was a Thursday night in Buffalo, and it had to be after they were already in the Dome, I think. But it was a game in Buffalo. It was Monday, and Howard was there drunk. I remember Cosell. So when was that? Howard was still doing games, but this was a Thursday night game.
2 or 3 probably, if it was in the Metro.
Howard was just loaded. I don't know how he did the game beforehand, but I remember after that game, he was blatant with his hate. And he always thought Shula ran the Shula was on the infractions committee, or not the competition committee. Yeah. That drove him nuts, because a self-promoter like Shula, he couldn't stand that guy. He couldn't, and I don't think he ever gave up. I don't think he ever got over Hank Stram either. The video, the 69 thing that Hank floating around like a peacock after that. He didn't. He enjoyed kicking his ass in the opener the next year in '70. That's for sure. Although in Vikingville, that was revenge for the Super Bowl. Really? The regular season game that made up for the Super Bowl? Okay. I got to tell you this, though, guys. You cannot believe what heroes the Vikings were in with the first year Cap, and then they still had the great defense for a few years after that, and then Fran came back. They only went 7-7 then. I'd say through the first 3 Super Bowls, by mid '75 we were getting a little skeptical here. What's going on? But we've never had anything like it in the Twin Cities. Even when the Twins won a World Series, it was joy, it was happiness, but this was utter adulation. And if you said anything bad about Bud or really any of the players, you were a terrible human being. They just owned this city like nobody's ever owned them. I mean, they own them now, but there's some skepticism now. There was no skepticism back then, and if you were a skeptic, people were not happy.
Yeah. It is too bad. We literally start every episode of Purple Daily by saying it's time for the Vikings to win a Super Bowl here before we die. And I think Judd and I were texting about it yesterday that it became a little more real yesterday when the figurehead, the guy that if there's anyone that you wanted to see that thing happen for, it would have been Bud.
One of Bud's. Look, he could give you the candid, controversial quote later in his age. And somebody asked him a couple of years ago, was Bud, the 4 guys that beat you in the Super Bowl, I think they're all in the Hall of Fame, right? Aren't they? Madden, Hank,
Shula,
and who we missing?
Stram,
yeah. I think they're all in the, he said, they're all in the Hall of Fame with you. He said, but they all won the Super Bowl. And Bud said, yes, but they're all dead. I'm still alive. Oh, man. I love him. I had it in my column today. I was talking to Chad yesterday. How did Chad, the Bud, how did you and my dad become such good friends? in the late 40s at the U. And he said, Sid had a car. Bud didn't have a car, so he could borrow Sid's car. That's how they became big buddies. There was always something in it for Sid. For Bud, any relationship that they ever had, there was something in it for Bud. And almost a child of the Depression. All those guys that grew up before World War II and with the families that had no money, man, no matter how much money they got in the bank, they still have an appreciation for every $5 that they spend. And Bud was one of those guys. Yeah. Just famously used to scoop up all the leftover sandwiches on the plane and feed him to his when that charter came back, and feed him to his dogs when he got home. So, so that the guys that didn't eat their turkey or bologna sandwiches on the planes back then, they butted. Scarf them up and put them in a bag and take them home and feed them to the dogs. So
amazing.
And it was a different world, but he really is us. You look at him, and that's who we want to be. I don't know if that's not Minnesota or not, but that's the steely-eyed guy on the sidelines. That's who we always wanted to be. Minnesota, we're hardy. Well, I was out shoveling today. I didn't feel hardy at all. I felt pissed off, that we have to do it again. Like, okay, I can do it once every 10 days. I don't want to do it 3 times in 4 days, so shovel in the walk. So, but we all want to think we wholesome guys and all that stuff. But he was an interesting guy. We might as well throw this out there too. Everybody's talking about getting together with, Sid and Bernsey, and now, somewhere higher power. Bud was a outspoken agnostic, so don't worry about that. Bud knows that Saturday was it. Okay, he, make up all the stories you want about, when they meet in the pearly gates. Bud was agnostic, so good for him. Yep. That's what he wants to be. I never resent anybody who wants to have that.
Whatever gets you through the day,
whatever
one way or the other.
Through the day, that's right.
Yep. Well, Pat, thanks. By the way, people, if you haven't checked out the Star Tribune from top to bottom, the sports section, including Pat's column, and I saw you tweet out that it's nice of Bud to have graciously passed in the morning, so you had a full day to put together a Sunday paper. It's very nice.
Hey, Judd, did you see who had the big photo on page 1A?
No,
Stormy Greener.
Really?
Yeah, they broke it out from back when Stormy did a portrait of it, and the long edited piece they have on Bud, the advance obit, was Youngblood. He wrote it in 2003. He told me.
I remember, Pat,
it's been edited and updated. And
I remember Kent actually at one point back then told me that he was going out to Winter Park to meet Bud in his office because Bud was very much okay with participating in his own obit.
Yes. Well, he said he never told him it was his obit, but Bud told him, "This is for my obit," right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Bud, never. And the same thing happened to me with Sid. And I wrote the advance obit on Sid early in the 2000s, and this long 110-inch thing. And then Phil, and 3 years later, the guy told me, Glenn Crevier said, you got to update that. And then 4 years later, you got to update that. And then 3-4 years later, you got to update that. And then the last time he told me to update it, I told him to go perform a sexual act on himself. I'm not doing it anymore. He's going to outlive me. I'm not updating the Sid obit.
A posthumous byline on an obituary.
It's been done before. The Times once had one. Yeah.
Augie had Calvin. Augie had a posthumous byline on Calvin's obit in the St. Paul paper. And I said, that's the one thing I don't want. I said, if he outlives me, I don't want a byline. I don't want a byline on the Sid Obit.
From staff reports, 110 inches. Staff reports.
Well, for staff reports is great, but when the lead is in the 15th paragraph, I think we all would have known.
Yes, Billy Burke. Put somebody else's name, make up some name, but I don't want my name on the Sid Obit if he's still alive, if he outlived me. So anyway.
Amazing. All right, Pat.
But it was a kick, man. It was you always got a smile on your face in the last 15 years when you ran into him because you wondered what was going on. There was always something going on. You just wondered what it might be, but he was very hardcore on how they're ruining the game with kickoff rules and stuff like that. He wanted to change things and keep the excitement and the physicality back in the game. So anyway, that's it. Right, Harry Peter Budgrant, and I don't know how many years I called him Horseshoe Harry, but I gave that up after a while. I once, back when you could. And the St. Paul Dispatch had such poor copy editing that you could get anything in. I once said he has a horseshoe, or only his proctologist can find it. So that wouldn't make it today. That would not.
No. But that's a good line.
Probably not.
All right, gentlemen. We'll see you Monday.
Yep. We'll see you tomorrow on Reusse Unchained. All right, there he is, Patrick Reusse. And go check out, if you guys haven't had a chance. If you can get your hands on an actual, this is one of those times where having the actual physical copy to save of a newspaper would benefit. We have a lot of younger, I think I want to say that I would say a good 2/3 to 3/4 at least of our audience probably didn't live through, and I'm included in that too, the Bud Grant actual coaching days. But it's amazing how the Vikings are great at it. Bud with his garage sales and just being, friendly with the media, and the sleeveless 27 below zero, walk out to the coin flip for that Seahawks game. He just he continued to be top of mind 40 years after he coached his last game.
I think the important thing with Bud too is this. So Bud was first of all extremely successful, but second of all, because he was of the stoic look and the steely blue eyes, and the fact that you always felt like Bud was in control. But I think what happened with Bud as well is he's the type of guy that your grandfather or your dad or your mom can tell you stories about to kids. And I think they're good enough stories that you listen, because they're almost, like fables. So I think Bud had the cachet here that the stories about him were passed down. Mm-hmm. And I think that created, like, if you go back and watch the games, and the league was certainly different then, but if you think about how stoic Bud was, there was something about Bud that was almost like a made-up fictional coach character. And I think that's what, I think his popularity maintained because he wasn't a goofball, because he didn't, during his coaching career, when you're talking about a guy who had his players, he didn't allow them to have a heater. And it played in perfectly that they often then played the Rams in big games, and this poor group from Los Angeles is freezing their asses off with gloves on and heaters, and the Vikings are like, no. And the other thing about the Met was, so the Viking fan base back then was extremely different. It was not the Moss, Moss changed the dynamic completely, but the Met Stadium fan base was, World War II vets, hardy men, and they loved Bud, because Bud was literally them.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, is what the Mets stood for, what the fan base did, which was, older guys in snowmobile suits with a flask that no one touched. And they didn't get super drunk and rowdy. They just got drunk and watched football. Yeah. And so, like, Bud played in perfectly. Everything about that played in perfectly to make the stories memorable. And I think that the most important thing, and then in January of 2016, when Bud comes out with the jacket on in -6 temperatures, that's sort of the confirmation to the young crowd of, oh, my grandpa wasn't kidding.
Yeah.
This guy is either nuts or the most, manly man of all time. So I think it played out perfectly. Bud was no question in the right place. Like, this was the right place.
I love the way that you and Reusse kind of characterized it in a similar way, and that he was this figurehead for what Minnesotans wanted to be, right? You just grind through it, the cold weather, the snow, the losses. I mean, everything about being a Minnesota sports fan, whether it's the climate or the disappointment, it all ends horribly. In some form, you're going to get 17 inches of snow. It's going to snow in the middle of March. You're going to get beat in the Super Bowl or in the NFC Championship game, and you just keep going forward stoically, right? That's the aspiration. And he was the personification of that, I guess, as Minnesota sports fans.
And the identity too, which it started with Bud, but it trickled down. So yes, the Vikings lost 4 Super Bowls in the 70s. But you know what? And this is us again. In some ways, we still won because we won the battle. We won the battle of cold. We had our thing. You know, the Metrodome, yeah, was loud. And I think that we took pride in the fact that opposing teams couldn't hear, right? But that doesn't make you nearly as cool as, you know what? In December, it's our stadium. Yeah. And we're going to bring you in here and kick your ass. And that was the feeling. So I think the whole thing was Bud was just the perfect coach at the perfect time in the perfect state.
Doesn't it? The U.S. Bank Stadium is very nice. It's very nice, very comfortable. It's one of the best new stadiums in the NFL. Vikings actually, among the Players Association survey, were voted as having basically the best organizational framework and facilities and everything. And it's great. But man, when you do think back to the identity and the hell that opponents had to go through from Los Angeles to come up for a divisional round playoff game or a conference championship game.
Yep.
You know, the organization has become a lot softer. It's become, they've had some, you know, Mike Zimmer brought some toughness, and they did get back to playing great defensive football for a couple years there. But ultimately the organization is just a lot softer and more finesse because of the Metrodome and US Bank Stadium, right? You're playing, it's the middle of January, and you're playing the Atlanta Falcons in a climate controlled 72-degree Teflon dome.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. And despite the fact that I'm an old guy, with the way the game is gone, this is preferable, I think, because like you're not going to get a free agent would probably not sign with you if you played outdoors, like a really good one. And with the way that the league is gone in style, you know, you obviously want the passing game to be as viable as possible. But back then, like Phil, you know, the league was totally different. Like when you go back and watch games like you were talking about before we started this morning, you know, that's a different animal. I mean, it's totally different. It's not what we know today. It's a league where you played on baseball fields. There were no coils below that ground to heat it. The hitting was, you know, unbelievable compared to today. In Pittsburgh, there were cars parked on the sideline because I guess they were trying to sell them. You know, you're just talking about a league. I don't want to say it was minor league, but it was certainly nothing like it's not transferable, and it's not the same game. But, you know, at that time, Bud was perfect for it. And I will say this, aside from what Patrick talked about with Page, it feels like when you talk to former players now, they really did love the guy.
Oh, like Tommy Kramer, Fran Tarkenton,
yeah,
Carl Eller. Yeah.
Yep. And when Rashad was here in December for that Miracle at the Met event, you know, I mean, Ahmad was going on and on about how much he loved Bud and how Bud had control. And I think, you know what's funny? I think that what Bud portrayed as a coach was how everybody felt, which from his players down to the fan base, which was because of how he approached it, it always looked like he was in control and had an answer. Mm-hmm. Now, he didn't, but, you know, I think that there's something, it's almost like when you're a kid with your parents, you want your parents to look like, I'm in control here. Like, you don't want your parents being like, holy hell, what's going on here? And so I think Bud conveyed that calmness and that being in control that we desire. And I think the players love that, and I know that the fans did.
Yeah. A couple just quick things here before we say goodbye on this episode. Just a couple little newsy things, and a shout out to our friends at TCL too. TCL, an official partner of the NFL, one of the world's best-selling consumer electronics brands. They have a new lineup of award-winning TVs delivering the most entertainment with stunning resolution, all at an affordable cost. Enjoy more of the things you love with TCL. So yeah, since the last time we sat down, Cam Dantzler was released. We had some. We released a mock draft episode yesterday that we had recorded on Friday, and of course, like the number one pick gets traded, and so if we obviously that episode was outdated, and we apologize for that yesterday. But and then Cam Dantzler got released, and then Bud Grant passed away. So a lot of things have happened here in the last few days, but we will talk much more at length, I think, about what that number one pick being traded means, maybe on tomorrow's episode. If any news breaks today that rises to, if there's Harrison Smith news or something, you and I are going to be ready to rock later on tonight for an emergency episode. We're just on standby if needed. But the Cam Dantzler release saves the Vikings about $2.7 million in cap space. So right now, as of this Sunday morning, the Vikings are still $7.4 million over the cap. Technically, they have until Wednesday to get compliant, but there's a lot of things brewing in the background right now. They could easily just restructure Brian O'Neill and get under, but they're going to need to get under and then clear a bunch of room to sign free agents. By clearing out Thielen and maybe even Harrison Smith at some point here, what they're really doing is clearing as much room as they can clear for 2023. They currently have $120 million cleared for 2024, which could help, but it could help you sign players next week. You could backload money. You could sign an extra player or two, backload money into 2024-25. And then, so on Dantzler, I don't know if you had any thoughts on Dantzler, but not a terrible player. But the thing is, he had sort of fallen out of favor now with two different coaching staffs at different times. So just some weird red flags there, I guess.
Well, and it's weird because he was playing okay, got hurt against the Commanders. But then late in the season, basically disappeared, and I want to say didn't play in like the last 3 games. So yeah, the 2020 draft is a very intriguing one,
dude. They drafted like 15 players or something, dude.
And you got Justin Jefferson, who fell to you, but you did take him. Full credit there. Like yes, it's some luck, but it's all. But you also pulled the trigger after I believe 4 other teams had, for who knows why, not taking Justin Jefferson. What hurts, though, is this. Jeff Gladney, who tragically passed, but he had been cut by the Vikings. He was the second first-round pick, a cornerback. And then Cam Dantzler was what? A third-round pick in that same draft. And if I'm not mistaken, right now, they have, I want to say, because Patrick Peterson and Duke Shelley are free agents, they have 4 cornerbacks on their roster, but that's where the misses really hurt. I think if one of those cornerbacks had been cut, it'd be like, okay, that's unfortunate because it's still a high draft pick. But when it's both of them, that's how you get into a really depleted situation that becomes a problem.
It's 4 on the roster on the 90-man offseason roster, 4, like you said, but it's 2 that actually really have experience playing or starting. It's Andrew Booth Jr. and a Caleb Evans. So a cornerback becomes even more so. If there was any question about, okay, what does Brian Flores think? What do they need? Well, they're going to have to probably sign a veteran, draft someone fairly high up. And then this nugget from this morning. So Jeremy Fowler and I think Dan Graziano teamed up for just sort of a pre-free agency. Tomorrow is the legal tampering window. So you're going to start to, the next 24, 48 hours, you're going to start to hear even more news. But this is what was written about the Vikings. The Vikings are open for business. They've released 3 veteran players thus far, including legacy player Adam Thielen, and multiple teams believe Minnesota has trade talks centered around Dalvin Cook. The team is attempting to re-sign Cook's backup, Alex Madison. That's a new nugget. Mm-hmm. So they are attempting to re-sign Madison, who could be poised for a starting role somewhere. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's a window into what they want to do. Say goodbye to Cook, elevate Alex Madison, give Ty Chandler a chance. Safety Harrison Smith most likely needs to take a pay cut to remain with the team. He's due $15 million in cash, and the Vikings are in clear scale-back mode. So not a lot new there other than they want Madison back, who's a free agent, and some more trade steam surrounding Dalvin Cook.
if they get that done and Madison comes back, I got to think Cook is traded or just gone.
Agreed.
Because it doesn't make sense. If I'm Madison, I want assurances of playing time now as well. So it would make no sense for him to come back if Cook was going to still be the guy that got the majority of the snaps at that position. The other thing is, I am guessing, I have no firsthand knowledge of this, but with the way that this whole thing has been going with Eric Kendricks officially announced last Monday, and then Thielen given his send-off on Friday, both in the morning at the start of the news cycle, I would guess we're going to get a Harrison Smith decision here pretty quickly, if it's not going to work. And the last report that we got on the bonus scoop session from Doogie on Friday was it was trending at that time towards a release of Smith. So clearly there's a hang-up in what the pay cut might be or what he is willing to take. But I got to think we're going to get news on somebody tomorrow, because that's sort of how it's gone. The O'Neal one, I'm curious. Are they just going to pull the trigger? Because it's a restructure that they can do, and it's as simple as heck.
Yeah.
Are they going to pull the trigger on that like tomorrow or Tuesday and just be done? I would imagine it's going to take place at some point.
Or they could also just wait. It's a card they have in their pocket. They don't need Brian O'Neal's permission. I mean, in a perfect world, you wouldn't even need to do it, right? In a perfect world, you would eat more of that money early, and keep the books clear even more for 2024. So
right.
But Jordan Hicks, I feel like, but we should just shut up and post this episode, because like news moves so fast here. But Jordan Hicks is a guy that you could save $5 million on immediately. So some of these things you wonder, like, are they done but not announced?
Right.
Are they scared about saying goodbye to both veteran linebackers because they don't know if Asamoah is good and they don't have any depth there? But we will see what happens here. So with that, we will shut up and post this episode. And thanks to Patrick Reusse, that was, so you can hear Patrick if you want more stories and just his thoughts on the current and past Minnesota sports landscape. The Reusse Unchained podcast feed, Apple, Spotify, scorenorth.com. You guys will do another Unchained episode tomorrow. He joins the Mackey and Judd show 3 days a week. So just awesome stories, man. No one can paint the picture quite like Patrick in situations like these. So that's a wrap on this episode of Purple Daily Vikings entertainment, and it hits a little closer to home when we say we just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die. See you guys tomorrow, or maybe even later tonight. We'll see.